The Adventures of Captain Underpants. Let's get started. Action, trails, and rough. Let's get started by that. First, graphic novel by Dave Perky. Let's get started. Chapter 4. Let's get started. Chapter 4. Mean old Mr. Crab. Do you see that old guy looking out the window up there? That's Mr. Crab, the principal. Now, Mr. Crab was the meanest, sourest old principal in the whole history of Jerome Howitt Elementary School. He hated laughter and singing. He hated the sound of children playing at recess. In fact, he hated children altogether. And guess what two children and Mr. Crab hated most of all? If you get George and Harold, you're right. Mr. Crab hated George and Harold. He hated their pranks and their wisecrack. He had their silly attitudes and their contest giggling. And he especially hated those awful Captain Underpants comic books. I'm going to get those boys one day, Mr. Crowley found. One day, very, very soon. Chapter 5, one day, very, very soon. Remember when I said the George and Harold series 3 got me into wrong big trouble at once? Well, this is the story of how that happened, and some huge pranks and a little black man turned their principal into the coolest superhero all time. It was the day of the big football game between Jerome Howitt Knucklehead and the Strawberry Stinkbox. The bleachers were filled with fans. The cheerleaders ran out the field and shook their pom-poms on their heads, and a fine black dust drift on their pom-poms and stepped all around them. "Give me a cake," said the cheerleader. "K," repeated the fan. "Give me an N," shouted the cheerleaders. "N," repeated the band. "Give me an A-achoo!" Sneezes all the cheerleaders. "Achoo, achoo!" The cheerleaders sneezed and sneezed and sneezed more. They couldn't stop sneezing. "Hey," said Fan with the bleachers, "somebody sprinkled the black pepper into the cheerleaders' pom-poms. I wonder who did that," asked another fan. The cheerleaders stumbled in the field, sneezing and dripping with the muskets as the marching band members their praises. But when the band began to play, steady streams of bubbles began to blowing out of instrument. Bubbles were everywhere, up and down the field and marching up the slip and slide, leaving behind the thick trails of wet, bubbly foam. "Hey!" shouted the fan with the bleachers. "Somebody pulled the bubble fast into the marching band's instrument. I wonder who did that." Soon the football teams took up the field, and the knucklehead kicked the ball up and up. It went the ball higher and higher it went. The ball sailed right into the clouds and kept light going until nobody could see it anywhere. "Hey!" shouted the fan in the bleachers. "Somebody filled with the game of the ball with helium." "I wonder who did that," asked another fan. But the missing ball didn't make any difference, because at that moment, the knuckleheads were roaming like the field and scratching and itching like crazy. "Hey!" shouted the coach. "Somebody repairs our deep-heating Master Rob Russian in a Mr. Prankster extra scratchy itching cream." "We wonder who did that," another fan with the bleachers. The whole afternoon went much time same way, the people shouting at everything from "Hey, somebody put sea monkeys on the lemonade" to "Hey, somebody glued on the bathroom door shut." Before long, all the fans were bleachers and got enough the left. The big game had been for, and everyone in the school was miserable. Jerome Howitt Elementary, boy, our feet smell bad. Everyone, that is, except for two giggling boys crouching the shadows below trees and branches. "Those were our best prank, yes," laughed Harold. "Yep," said George. "They'll be hard to top, that's for sure. I just as though we got busted for this Don't worry, said George. Jeez. We covered our tracks very well. There is no way we'll get busted. Chapter 6 Busted. The day at school, announcement came of the loudspeaker. George, Beard, and Harold Dutchins, please report to Principal Croft's office at once. Uh-oh, said Harold. I think I don't really like the sound of that. Don't worry, said George. They can poop anything. George and Harold entered the Principal Croft office and found it down the chairs in front of the desk. The two boys had been in this office together and countless time before this, but this time was different. Mr. Croft was smiling. As long as the George and Harold was known as Mr. Croft, they had never ever seen him smile. Mr. Croft knew something. I didn't see the boys at the big game yesterday. Said Mr. Croft. No, said George. We weren't feeling well. Yeah, said Harold Stamp nervously. We went home. Oh, that's too bad, said the Principal Croft. You boys missed a good game. George and Harold quickly glanced at each other, and they tried hard to not lucky. Lucky for you, I have a videotape for the whole thing, said Mr. Croft. Said he had turned in a television at the corner and pressed the play button on the VCR. A black and white image appeared on the TV screen. It was an overhead shot of George and Harold sprinkling pepper into the cheerleader pom-pom. Next came a bubble bath into the marching band's instrument. How do you get the pre-game show? Asked Mr. Croft with the TV screen. George is on the television screen in a terror. And he couldn't answer. Harold was grooving the floor. He couldn't look. The tape went on, revealing all of the George and Harold behind the scenes. By now, both boys were lying on the floor, scrolling nervously and dripping with sweat. Mr. Croft turned on TV. You know, he said, ever since you boys come to school, it's been one prank after another. First, you fit dissect frog in a jar and friend teacher. Then you made it snow in the cafeteria. Then you rigged all the income and played the weird air Yakovic songs and a full blast for 6 hours straight. Four long years. You two have been running up the mock the school and they never now be able to prove anything until now. Mr. Croft on the videotape in hand. I took a rivetery out and spraying tiny videos and cameras all around the school. I know I catch you two in the act one day. I just didn't know it would be so easy. Chapter 7 A Little Blackmail. Mr. Croft sat in the back of the chair and struggled for a long time. Finally, George got off the car. What you going to do with that tape? I thought you never ask. Laughed the Principal Croft. If you thought it was hard to about what to do with this tape, Mr. Croft said, at first I thought I sent the copies to your parents. The boys swore and sank deeper in the chairs. I thought now I sent the copy to the school board, said Mr. Croft. I couldn't get you both paid for this. The boys swore harder and sank deeper to the chair. Finally, I came into decision. And Mr. Croft, I think a football team would be very curious to find out just who thinks Santa copied them. George and Harold with their chairs and fell their knees. No, said George. You can't do that. They're curious. Yeah, they big Harold. They're curious every day of the rest of their lives. Mr. Croft laughed. Please have mercy, the boys cried. We'll do anything. Miss Principal Crop with the right. He reached in the desk, grew out of the demo, and tossed it at the boys. If you want to be dead as long as you live, you follow through exactly. George and Harold carefully looked at over the wrist. This is blackmail, George said. Cards is what you like, Principal Crop snapped. But if you two don't follow that list exactly, that's the tape became the property of Jerome Howitz Nacaret. Chapter 8, Crime and Punishment. At 6 o'clock in the morning, George and Harold dragged himself out of the bed and walked into Mr. Crop's house and began to washing the car. Then, while Harold discovered the tires and George roamed and around and pulling up the wind and grabbed grass, and he could find afterward they cleaned the gap and washed into the windows of Mr. Crop's house. At school, George and Harold sat up straight and listened carefully, and they spoke only when they spoke to. They didn't tell jokes. They were the pranks, and they didn't smile. They were no keep pinching herself. I just know this is a dream. At lunch, the two boys vacuumed Mr. Crop's office and shined their shoes and polished the desk up. At recess, they clipped the fingernails and ironed his tie. Each spare moment, the boys daily still want to catering to Mr. Crop every whim. After school, George and Harold mowed and Mr. Crop's lawn and tended his garden and began to putting on the front of the house. At sunset, Mr. Crop came into the white and handed the boy a stack of books. Gentlemen, he said, I ask you teachers, give me the books, extra homework. Now go home, study hard, and I'll see you back in the 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. We got a busy day ahead for us. Thank you, sir, murmured the two boys, and George and Harold walked home dead tired. Man, this is the worst day of my entire life. Don't worry, said Harold. We only have to do this for 8 more years, then we can have the all same far of Brandon where they'll find us. Maybe I got a better idea, said George. 3D hypno-ring. He took a piece of paper out of his pocket and rubbed it on Harold. It was an old magazine from the 3D hypno-ring. How is going to help us? Asked Harold. All we have to do is hypnotize Mr. Crop, said George, and we'll make him give us video and forget this whole mess ever happened. Oh, that's a great idea, said Harold. And that's the best part. We only have to wait for the 4 to 6 weeks for the delivery. Chapter 9, 4 to 6 weeks later. After a 4 to 6 week break, later and homework assignment, then a hammering, a good behavior at school, a package, and a George mailbox and reflection of his company. It was the 3D hypno-ring. Hallelujah, said George. It's everything I hoped for. Let me see, said Harold. Don't look directly at it, warned George. You don't want to get hypnotized, do you? Do you really think it works? Said Harold. Do you really think we can amaze our friend, control our animals, and take off the world just like Ed said? I bet that'll work, said George, or else we just made 4 whole bucks. Chapter 10, the 3D hypno-ring. The next morning, George and Harold didn't arrive at Mr. Crop's house to wash his cars and raise the roof. In fact, he was already getting school. When they finally showed up, Mr. Crop was standing in front of the waiting table. Oh boy, he was mad. Mr. Crop was the silent voice and slammed the door. All right, where are you two this morning? He growled. We want to come over your house, said George, but we are busy trying to figure out the secret of this ring. What ring? Snapped the Mr. Crop. The children didn't show them a ring in the principal quote. It's got one of these patterns in it. If you rather look at long enough, pictures appear. Wow, hold the stairs, said Mr. Crop. I can't see any darn thing. Or else it didn't work. Okay, it had to move back and forth, said George. Or else it didn't work. Mr. Crow's eyes followed at the ring, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. You have to sink deeper into the ring, said the herald. Deeper, 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 deeper. You're getting sleepy, said the George. Very sleepy. Mr. Crow was so drop. I'm so sleepy. He mumbled. After he sung a minute, Mr. Crow's eyes were closed and tight and began to snow. You're under our spell, said the George. When I snap my finger, you will obey our